The sound was unmistakable, bone meeting hoof with the sickening crack of a baseball bat snapping in half. Jamal Evans hit the dirt of the Black Hills Stock Show arena like a rag doll, his body twisting unnaturally as Thunder Road's massive rear hoof connected with the left side of his face. The impact sent a spray of blood across the packed earth, and the crowd of 8,000 spectators fell into a stunned silence that seemed to swallow the entire arena. For seconds, that's all it had taken for Jamal's dreams to shatter along with his orbital bone and jaw. The 22-year-old from Detroit had traveled over 1,000 miles to Rapid City, South Dakota, with nothing but a battered pickup truck, $200 in his wallet, and enough determination to fuel a freight train. Now he lay motionless in the dirt, his face a grotesque mask of swelling flesh and blood, while Thunder Road snorted and pawed just feet away before the pickup men guided the massive bull toward the exit gate. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tommy Reeves from behind the chutes, his weathered hands gripping the metal rails so tightly his knuckles turned white. The veteran rider had seen plenty of wrecks in his 15 years on the circuit, but something about the way Jamal's body had crumpled made his stomach turn. "Somebody get the medics out there now." Dr. Sarah Martinez was already sprinting across the arena, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she navigated the uneven terrain. The arena's head physician had been watching from her position near the chutes when the wreck happened, and she'd seen immediately that this wasn't just another routine fall. The angle of Jamal's head, the way his left eye had already begun to swell shut, the blood pooling beneath his face. Every instinct told her this was bad. "Don't move him," she called out to the arena workers who had reached Jamal first. "Possible spinal injury. Get me a backboard and a cervical collar, now." The arena announcer's voice crackled over the speakers, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the shocked crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief intermission while our medical team attends to rider number 47, Jamal Evans from Detroit, Michigan. Please remain in your seats." But the crowd wasn't thinking about the next ride or the competition standings. 8,000 pairs of eyes were fixed on the young man lying in the dirt, his dreams literally scattered across the arena floor along with his blood. Jamal's consciousness drifted in and out like a broken radio signal. One moment he could hear the distant murmur of the crowd, the next everything faded to black. When awareness flickered back, he felt hands gently probing his neck and skull, heard urgent voices discussing fractures and possible concussion protocol. "Jamal, can you hear me?" Dr. Martinez's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Don't try to move or speak. You've been hurt, but we're taking care of you." He tried to respond, but his jaw felt like it was held together with broken glass. Every attempt to open his mouth sent lightning bolts of agony through his skull. Panic began to set in as he realized he couldn't feel the left side of his face properly. Everything was numb and wrong. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency, securing his neck and carefully rolling him onto the backboard. As they lifted him, Jamal caught a glimpse of the arena through his one good eye. The lights seemed impossibly bright, and faces blurred together in a kaleidoscope of concern and curiosity. Somewhere in that sea of people, he knew his girlfriend Maya was watching, probably fighting back tears and regretting every argument they'd had about him pursuing this dangerous dream. Orbital fracture, definite mandible fracture, possible traumatic brain injury. Dr. Martinez spoke into her radio as they carried Jamal toward the ambulance. "We need an or on standby at regional. This boy's going to need surgery tonight." Tommy Reeves jogged alongside the stretcher, his face etched with guilt and worry. He'd been the one to encourage Jamal to enter this event, had spent weeks helping him prepare for Thunder Road's notorious left spin. Now he watched helplessly as they loaded the young rider into the ambulance, the flashing red and blue lights painting the arena in an otherworldly glow. "Is he going to be okay?" Tommy asked Dr. Martinez as she climbed into the ambulance. She paused for a moment, looking back at the veteran cowboy who had clearly taken this kid under his wing. "I don't know," she said honestly. "The next few hours will tell us a lot." As the ambulance pulled away from the arena, its sirens wailing into the cold South Dakota night, the crowd began to disperse. Many of the spectators walked in subdued silence, the evening's entertainment forgotten in the face of such brutal reality. This was the side of rodeo that didn't make it into the highlight reels. The side where young men's bodies were broken as easily as their spirits, where 8 seconds could change everything. In the back of the ambulance, Jamal's mind drifted through fragments of memory and consciousness. He thought about his father, dead 3 years now from a heart attack, who had never understood his son's obsession with riding bulls. He thought about Maya, probably crying in the stands, wondering if she'd ever see the man she fell in love with again. Most of all, he thought about those 4 seconds. How Thunder Road had felt beneath him before everything went wrong, how the bull had spun left just like Tommy had warned him, how he'd lost his grip and fallen right into the path of destruction. Regional Hospital loomed ahead through the ambulance windows, its emergency room entrance blazing with fluorescent light. Dr. Martinez continued monitoring Jamal's vital signs, noting the concerning irregularity in his breathing and the way his pupils responded differently to light. The damage to his face was obvious and severe, but her greater worry was what might be happening inside his skull that they couldn't see. "Trauma Bay 2 is ready," came the voice through her radio. "Copy that. ETA 2 minutes." Jamal felt the ambulance slow and turn, heard the mechanical whir of automatic doors opening. Soon he was moving again, ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights flashing past in a monotonous rhythm. Voices spoke in medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language, discussing his injuries with the clinical detachment necessary for their profession. 22-year-old male, bull riding accident, significant facial trauma with suspected orbital and mandible fractures, possible concussion, vitals stable but showing signs of increased intracranial pressure. The emergency room erupted into controlled chaos around him. Nurses appeared with equipment and medications, doctors examined his wounds with practiced hands, and somewhere in the background, he heard someone calling Maya's name. She must have given them her contact information when they registered him for the event. "Sir, we're going to give you something for the pain," a nurse explained as she inserted an into his arm. "You're safe now. We're going to take good care of you." Safe. The word seemed almost foreign after what had just happened. For seconds ago, he'd been a bull rider chasing his dreams across the country. Now he was just another broken body on a hospital gurney, facing an uncertain future and a long road to recovery that might not even lead back to the arena. As the pain medication began to take effect, Jamal's thoughts grew fuzzy around the edges. The last clear image in his mind before consciousness faded was Thunder Road's massive hooves, suspended in the air for just a moment before gravity and 1,500 pounds of angry bull came crashing down on his dreams. 3 days later, Jamal woke to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospital air. His face felt like it had been rebuilt from spare parts, held together by a complex arrangement of metal plates, screws, and surgical wire. The left side of his jaw was wired shut, forcing him to breathe carefully through his nose and making speech impossible beyond muffled groans. Maya sat beside his bed, her usually perfect makeup replaced by the exhausted pallor of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore the same clothes she'd had on at the rodeo, evidence that she'd barely left his side since the accident. "Hey," she whispered when she noticed his eyes focusing on her. "You're awake. How do you feel?" Jamal tried to answer but quickly realized the futility of attempting speech with his jaw wired shut. Instead, he made a questioning sound and tried to gesture toward his face, wanting to understand the extent of the damage. "The surgery went well," Maya said, reading his unspoken question. "Dr. Patel, he's the oral surgeon, he said they were able to repair everything. Your orbital bone, your jaw, even saved most of your teeth. But," she paused, clearly struggling with how much to tell him, "it's going to be a long recovery. Months, maybe. Months." The word hit him like another hoof to the face. The season was just beginning, and if he missed months of competition, he'd lose his chance at qualifying for the Professional Bull Riders Finals. More than that, he'd lose the momentum he'd been building, the sponsors who were just starting to notice him, the slim chance he had of making a real living in this sport. A knock on the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Tommy Reeves entered carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked slightly wilted from the long drive from his ranch outside Rapid City. The veteran rider's usual confident demeanor was replaced by obvious guilt and concern. "How's he doing?" Tommy asked Maya, though his eyes remained fixed on Jamal's bandaged face. "Better. The swelling's going down, and the doctors say the surgery was successful." Tommy approached the bed slowly, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "Kid, I'm sorry. I should have pulled you off that bull when I saw how ornery Thunder Road was acting in the chute. Should have known better than to put a rookie on a bull like that." Jamal shook his head slightly, immediately regretting the movement as pain shot through his skull. He reached for the notepad on his bedside table, the one Maya had brought so he could communicate. With shaky handwriting he wrote, "Not your fault. My choice." Tommy read the note and his shoulders sagged with relief, though the guilt remained etched in the lines around his eyes. Maybe so, but I still feel responsible. Been riding for 15 years, and I should have known better. He pulled up a chair on the opposite side of the bed from Maya. Listen, I talked to some folks in the circuit. They're setting up a fund to help with your medical bills. Cowboys taking care of cowboys, you know? The gesture touched Jamal more than he could express. The rodeo community was known for looking after its own, but he'd never expected to be on the receiving end of such generosity. He wrote another note. Thank you. Means everything. Don't mention it. We've all been there, or we're going to be. Tommy's weathered hands fidgeted with his hat brim. Question is, what are you planning to do when you heal up? You thinking about getting back on bulls? Maya's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. It was clearly a question she'd been dreading, and one they hadn't discussed yet. Jamal looked between Tommy and Maya, seeing the hope in the cowboy's eyes and the fear in his girlfriend's. Before he could write a response, Dr. Patel entered the room carrying a clipboard and wearing the serious expression that medical professionals perfect for delivering difficult news. He was a small man with graying hair and gentle hands that had spent the last 3 days reconstructing Jamal's face. Good afternoon, Jamal. I'm glad to see you're awake and alert. Dr. Patel glanced at the notepad in Jamal's hands. I see you've figured out how to communicate. That's excellent. Your cognitive function appears to be normal, which was one of our primary concerns given the severity of your head trauma. He pulled up another chair and consulted his clipboard. Let me give you a complete picture of your injuries and recovery timeline. You suffered fractures to your left orbital bone, your mandible in 2 places, and severe soft tissue damage. We've repaired everything surgically, but the healing process will take time. Jamal gestured for his notepad and wrote, How long until I can compete again? Dr. Patel read the question and exchanged a meaningful look with Maya. That's complicated. Physically, your bones should be fully healed in 12 to 16 weeks. However, given the nature of your sport and the risk of re-injury, I would strongly advise against returning to bull riding. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that wouldn't die. Jamal felt his world tilt on its axis as the doctor continued speaking about permanent nerve damage risks, the possibility of traumatic brain injury from future impacts, and the likelihood that another serious facial injury could result in permanent disability. I've seen athletes return to contact sports after injuries like this, Dr. Patel said gently. Some do fine. Others end up back in my operating room with damage that can't be repaired. The choice is ultimately yours, but I want you to understand the risks. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He'd heard similar speeches from doctors over the years, had friends who'd ignored medical advice and returned to ride again, and others who'd hung up their spurs on the spot. Each man had to make his own peace with the risks. Maya, however, had no such conflicted feelings. He's not going back, she said firmly. Look at him, doctor. Look at what one bull did in 4 seconds. He's lucky to be alive. Jamal wrote furiously on his notepad. That's not your decision to make. Isn't it? Maya's voice rose slightly, and tears began to form in her eyes. I'm the one who had to watch them carry you out on a stretcher. I'm the one who's been sitting here for 3 days wondering if you were going to wake up the same person who went to sleep. I'm the one who's going to spend the rest of my life terrified every time you climb on another bull. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of medical monitors. Tommy looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, clearly uncomfortable with the intimate conflict unfolding before him. Dr. Patel maintained his professional composure, though it was obvious he'd witnessed similar arguments many times before. Jamal stared at the notepad for a long moment before writing. I need time to think. Of course you do, Dr. Patel said. This isn't a decision that needs to be made today, or even this week. Focus on healing first. Everything else can wait. After the doctor left, Tommy made his excuses and headed back to his ranch, promising to check in again soon. That left Jamal alone with Maya and the weight of an impossible decision. Outside his hospital window, Rapid City continued its daily rhythm, unaware that a young man's dreams were being dissected in room 314. Maya moved her chair closer to his bed and took his uninjured hand in hers. I know you think I'm being unreasonable, she said softly. But I love you, Jamal. I love the man you are, not the bull rider you want to be. There are other ways to make a living, other dreams to chase. Jamal squeezed her hand and wrote, This is all I know. All I'm good at. That's not true, and you know it. You're smart, you're hardworking, you could do anything you set your mind to. She brushed a tear from her cheek. I just don't want to lose you to this sport. I can't go through this again. As the afternoon wore on, visitors came and went. Fellow competitors from the rodeo stopped by with get-well cards and stories from the circuit. Local reporters wanted statements about the accident and his future plans. Hospital staff monitored his progress and adjusted his medication. But through it all, the central question remained unanswered. What happens to a bull rider who can no longer ride bulls? What happens to a man whose identity is so tied to 8 seconds of adrenaline and danger that he can't imagine any other life? Jamal lay in his hospital bed as evening approached, watching the South Dakota sun set through his window and casting long shadows across the room. Somewhere in Rapid City, Thunder Road was probably in a pasture, content and unaware of the destruction he'd caused. The bull had simply been doing what bulls do, trying to throw off the rider. There was no malice in it, no personal vendetta. It was just the nature of the sport. The nature of the sport. That phrase echoed in Jamal's mind as he drifted toward sleep. Everyone who climbed onto a bull's back knew the risks. Broken bones, concussions, internal injuries, paralysis, even death. These were accepted possibilities in exchange for 8 seconds of glory and the chance to prove something to the world and to yourself. But knowing the risks intellectually and experiencing them personally were two entirely different things. Now that he'd felt Thunder Road's hoof connect with his face, now that he'd tasted his own blood in the arena dirt, the risks seemed more real and immediate than ever before. As consciousness faded, Jamal's last thought was a simple question that would haunt him through the long weeks of recovery ahead. Was 8 seconds worth everything he'd just lost, and everything he might lose in the future? 6 weeks later, Jamal sat in his Detroit apartment staring at a stack of medical bills that seemed to grow taller every day. The fundraising efforts from the rodeo community had helped significantly, but the reality of American healthcare costs was hitting him like a second bull. Physical therapy, follow-up surgeries, medication, and lost income from missed competitions had created a financial crater as deep as the emotional one. Maya had moved back to her own place 3 weeks earlier, after their relationship finally cracked under the pressure of his recovery and their fundamental disagreement about his future. She'd been supportive during the immediate aftermath, but as the days turned into weeks and Jamal continued to research his return to competition, the distance between them had grown insurmountable. "You're choosing an animal over us," she'd said during their final argument. "You're choosing 8 seconds over 8 years together." Now his apartment felt hollow without her presence. The silence was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from 8 Mile Road. His jaw had healed enough that he could speak normally again, though he still felt phantom pains when the weather changed. The doctors had done an excellent job with the reconstruction, but the left side of his face would never look quite the same. His phone rang, startling him from his brooding. Tommy Reeves' name appeared on the display. "How you feeling, kid?" Tommy's voice carried genuine concern, as it had during his weekly check-in calls since the accident. "Like hell," Jamal replied honestly. "But the bones are healed. Dr. Patel cleared me for normal activities last week." Normal activities. That's an interesting phrase for a bull rider. Tommy paused. "You given any more thought to what you want to do?" It was the question everyone kept asking, and the one Jamal still couldn't answer definitively. Logically, he knew he should walk away. Find a regular job, maybe go back to school, build a safe and predictable life like Maya had wanted. But every time he tried to imagine himself in an office or a factory, something inside him rebelled. "I've been watching videos," Jamal said. "Studying my ride on Thunder Road, breaking down what went wrong." Tommy's sharp intake of breath was audible over the phone. "That's not healthy, son. Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave the past in the past. I let go too early. Lost my grip when he went into his spin. If I'd maintained my hold for another second, I would have been in better position when I came off." "Jamal." Tommy's voice carried a warning tone. "You're talking like a man who's planning to get back on bulls." "Maybe I am." The silence stretched between them for nearly a minute. Finally, Tommy spoke again, his words careful and measured. "Look, I've seen a lot of cowboys come back from injuries. Some of them do just fine. Others never quite get their confidence back. They ride scared, and scared riders get hurt worse than confident ones." "I'm not scared," Jamal said, though even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if they were true. "Maybe you should be. Fear keeps you alive in this sport. The trick is learning to manage it, not eliminate it." Tommy paused again. "Tell you what, I'm heading to a small rodeo in Oklahoma next weekend. Nothing fancy, just local boys trying to make some extra money. You want to come along? Not to ride, just to watch. See how it feels being around bulls again." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. Jamal hadn't been to a rodeo since his accident, hadn't even watched one on television. The thought of sitting in the stands, smelling the arena dirt and leather, and listening to the announcer call rides, made his stomach tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "I'll think about it," he said. "Fair enough. But don't think too long. Sometimes the best way to know if you still love something is to get close to it again." After ending the call, Jamal walked to his bedroom closet and pulled out a cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside were his riding gear. His protective vest, his gloves, his lucky belt buckle that had been a gift from his father before he died. At the bottom of the box was a photo of him on his first successful 8-second ride, taken at a small rodeo in Indiana 6 months before the accident. In the photo, he was grinning from ear to ear, his face unmarked by surgical scars, his confidence intact. The bull beneath him was a smaller animal named Sidewinder, nothing like the massive Thunder Road. But the joy in his eyes was unmistakable. This was a man doing exactly what he was meant to do. He set the photo on his dresser and stared at it for a long time. That version of himself seemed like a stranger now, someone naive about the real costs of chasing dreams in an arena filled with 1,500-pound animals bred for aggression. The next few days passed in a routine of physical therapy exercises and job applications. Jamal had been working construction before his rodeo career took off, and several contractors had offered him positions. Steady work, good pay, benefits, everything a sensible person would want. But every time he filled out an application, he felt like he was signing his own death warrant. On Thursday, he made his decision about Tommy's invitation. He called the older cowboy and agreed to make the trip to Oklahoma, telling himself it was just curiosity, just a chance to see old friends. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was a test of his courage, his commitment, and his willingness to risk everything again for 8 seconds of truth. The drive to Oklahoma took 12 hours, and Jamal spent most of it listening to country music and trying not to think about what he was doing. Tommy had offered to fly him down, but Jamal wanted the time to prepare himself mentally for what he might see and feel. The rodeo was being held at a small county fairgrounds outside Tulsa, the kind of venue where young cowboys cut their teeth before moving on to bigger arenas. The purse was small, the competition local, but the atmosphere was pure rodeo. Vendors selling barbecue and beer, families spread out on blankets watching their sons and daughters compete, and the ever-present smell of livestock and leather. Tommy found him in the parking lot, where Jamal sat in his truck gathering courage to walk through the gate. "You made it," Tommy said, leaning against the driver's side door. "How you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Jamal replied honestly. "That's normal. First time back is always rough." Tommy studied his young friend's face, noting the tension around his eyes and the way he kept touching the surgical scars along his jaw. "We can leave if you want. No shame in it." "No. I need to do this." They bought tickets and found seats in the aluminum bleachers overlooking the arena. The familiar sounds of rodeo washed over Jamal like a wave. The announcer's voice echoing over the speaker system, the metallic clang of chute gates, the low rumble of bulls in the holding pens. His hands began to sweat despite the cool evening air. The bull riding was the final event, and as they waded through bareback riding and saddle bronc competition, Jamal felt his anxiety building. He watched the other riders prepare behind the chutes, going through the same rituals he'd once performed, stretching, visualizing their rides, wrapping their bull ropes with practiced precision. "You see that kid in the red shirt?" Tommy pointed to a young rider, who couldn't have been more than 18. "Reminds me of you when you first started. All heart, not much technique, but willing to try anything." Jamal watched the kid prepare for his ride, noted the mixture of excitement and terror in his eyes. It was the same expression Jamal had worn for months before the accident, the look of someone who hadn't yet learned what the sport could take from you. The first bull out of the chute was a spinner named Tornado Alley, and the rider lasted exactly 3 seconds before being thrown into the dirt. He got up quickly, tipping his hat to the crowd and jogging toward the fence with his pride intact if not his score. Jamal remembered that feeling, the disappointment of a failed ride mixed with relief at escaping injury. As the competition progressed, Jamal found himself analyzing each ride with the eye of an experienced competitor. He noted hand positions, weight distribution, the way riders adjusted to their bull's movements. Most importantly, he watched the wrecks, the moments when rides went wrong and cowboys hit the dirt hard. "You're studying," Tommy observed. "Can't help it. It's like watching game film." "Game film for what?" Jamal didn't answer immediately. He was watching a particularly violent dismount where the rider got stepped on by his bull, then got up and walked away like nothing had happened. 6 months ago, Jamal would have seen it as evidence of the rider's toughness. Now he saw it as luck, pure, dumb luck that the hoof hadn't connected with something vital. "I don't know yet," he finally replied. The kid in the red shirt was the last rider of the night, drawn to face a bull called Bad Medicine. Jamal recognized the animal from his own studying, a big black bull with a reputation for quick spins and hard landings. Not the kind of draw a young rider wanted for his first professional ride. "He's going to have his hands full," Tommy muttered. The chute gate opened, and Bad Medicine exploded into the arena with a fury that made the crowd gasp. The kid maintained his seat through the first 3 seconds, his free arm pumping for balance as the bull spun left, then right, then launched into a series of high kicks that would have challenged even experienced riders. At 5 seconds, the kid's grip began to slip. At 6 seconds, he was riding on borrowed time. At 7 seconds, he was hanging underneath the bull, one hand still wrapped in the rope, his body being whipped around like a rag doll. The 8-second whistle blew just as the kid finally came free, but instead of landing clear of the bull, he fell directly underneath Bad Medicine's hooves. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps as the massive animal's rear legs came down hard, connecting with the rider's back and driving him face-first into the dirt. Jamal was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, his hands gripping the railing, so hard his knuckles went white. The kid wasn't moving. The bullfighters, the brave clowns whose job it was to protect fallen riders, were trying to distract Bad Medicine while the medical team rushed onto the arena floor. "Come on, get up," Jamal whispered, remembering his own moment of helplessness in the Rapid City dirt. "Come on, kid." After what felt like an eternity, the young rider stirred and slowly pushed himself to his knees. The crowd erupted in relief as he stood and waved to show he was okay, though Jamal could see the pain etched in his face even from the stands. "Qualified ride," the announcer called out. 8 seconds on Bad Medicine for a score of 76 points. The kid had achieved his goal, his first qualified ride at the professional level, but Jamal could see it had cost him. He limped toward the fence, favoring his left leg, probably nursing bruised ribs and a collection of other injuries that wouldn't show up until tomorrow morning. As the crowd began to disperse and the arena lights dimmed, Jamal remained seated, processing what he'd witnessed. The kid's ride had been everything rodeo was supposed to be: courage in the face of danger, skill under pressure, and the triumph of human will over animal power. But it had also been a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong, how a moment's bad luck could change everything. "So," Tommy asked as they walked back to the parking lot, "what did you think?" Jamal considered the question as they reached his truck. He thought about the rush he'd felt watching the rides, the way his pulse had quickened with each successful 8-second effort. He also thought about the terror that had gripped him when the kid went down, the vivid flashback to his own accident that had made his surgical scars ache in sympathy. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm not ready to decide anything yet." Tommy nodded, understanding the complexity of what his young friend was wrestling with. "That's fair. Sometimes the best decisions come from sitting with uncertainty for a while." As Jamal drove back toward Detroit through the dark Oklahoma night, he replayed the evening over and over in his mind. Part of him had hoped that seeing bulls again would either reignite his passion or confirm his decision to walk away. Instead, he felt more confused than ever. The kid in the red shirt had reminded him why he'd fallen in love with bull riding in the first place. The pure test of will and skill, the moment when everything else in the world disappeared except you, the bull, and 8 seconds of truth. But watching him get trampled had also reminded Jamal of the price that truth demanded. By the time he reached the Detroit city limits, dawn was breaking over the industrial landscape of his hometown. He'd driven through the night without stopping, sustained by coffee and the need to keep moving. Now, faced with another day of recovery and decision-making, he felt the weight of his uncertain future settling back onto his shoulders. His apartment welcomed him back with the same hollow silence he'd left behind. The stack of medical bills still sat on his kitchen table, the job applications still waited for his signature, and the photo of his successful ride still stared at him from his dresser. But something had changed during his night in Oklahoma. For the first time since his accident, Jamal had concrete evidence that he could be around bulls without falling apart. He'd watched other riders face the same risks he'd faced, and he'd survived the experience. It wasn't the same as climbing onto a bull's back, but it was a start. As he fell into an exhausted sleep, Jamal's last conscious thought was of the kid in the red shirt, celebrating his qualified ride despite the pain and fear. There was something beautiful about that kind of stubborn courage, something that reminded him why he'd been willing to travel 1,000 miles and risk everything for 8 seconds in the first place. The question now was whether that beauty was worth risking everything again. 2 months later, Jamal stood behind the chutes at a small rodeo in Kansas, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. The familiar sounds and smells of the arena surrounded him. Leather creaking, bulls snorting, the distant murmur of a crowd settling in for the evening's entertainment. But everything felt different now, filtered through the lens of his accident and the long months of recovery that had followed. "You sure about this?" Tommy asked for the third time, his weathered hands checking and rechecking Jamal's protective gear. The veteran cowboy had reluctantly agreed to help with Jamal's comeback attempt, but his concern was written clearly across his face. "I'm sure," Jamal replied, though his voice carried less conviction than his words. He flexed his fingers inside his riding glove, feeling the familiar texture of the bull rope that would either carry him to redemption or send him back to the hospital. The decision to return hadn't come all at once. It had built slowly over the weeks following his trip to Oklahoma, crystallizing through conversations with other riders who'd overcome serious injuries, through sleepless nights spent weighing risk against regret, and ultimately through the growing certainty that he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. Maya had stopped taking his calls when she learned about his plans. His mother had cried when he told her, begging him to reconsider. Even Dr. Patel had tried one last time to dissuade him during his final medical clearance exam. "The bones have healed well," the surgeon had said, studying X-rays of Jamal's reconstructed face. "But psychologically, are you prepared for this? The mind often remembers trauma, even when the body has recovered." Jamal had assured him he was ready, but now, standing in the competitor's area with his number 23 pinned to his back, he wasn't entirely certain that was true. His hands were shaking slightly, and he found himself touching the surgical scars along his jaw whenever he thought no one was looking. The bull he'd drawn was called Midnight Express, a 1,200-pound black Brahma cross with a reputation for consistent bucking and relatively clean dismounts. Tommy had helped him research the animal's patterns, a tendency to spin right out of the chute, followed by a series of high kicks before settling into a more predictable rhythm. It was exactly the kind of bull a rider needed for a comeback attempt, challenging enough to be respectable, but not so dangerous as to be suicidal. "Remember what we practiced," Tommy said as they walked toward the chutes. "Keep your chin tucked, free hand high, and don't try to be a hero. 8 seconds and a clean dismount, that's all we're looking for tonight." Jamal nodded, though part of him wondered if 8 seconds would be enough. Not for the judges or the crowd, but for himself. He needed to prove that Thunder Road hadn't taken something essential from him, that he could still face down 1,500 pounds of angry beef and emerge victorious. The arena announcer's voice crackled over the speakers as the competition began. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wheat State Rodeo. We've got 25 of the region's finest bull riders competing tonight for a purse of $15,000. Jamal watched the first few riders from behind the chutes, studying their techniques and outcomes with the intensity of a graduate student. Some made their 8 seconds and walked away with modest scores. Others hit the dirt hard, reminding him exactly why he'd spent the last 4 months questioning his sanity. "Evans," called the chute boss, "you're up in 5. The words hit him like ice water. This was it, the moment when all the physical therapy, all the soul-searching, all the sleepless nights would be distilled into 8 seconds of pure truth. He began his pre-ride ritual, the same sequence of stretches and mental preparation he'd used before the accident, hoping muscle memory would overcome the fear that threatened to paralyze him. Tommy helped him settle onto Midnight Express's broad back, the bull surprisingly calm in the confined space of the chute. Some animals went crazy when riders climbed aboard, but this one seemed to be saving his energy for the arena. Jamal wrapped the bull rope around his gloved hand, feeling the familiar grip that had once been as natural as breathing. "Feel good?" Tommy asked. Jamal tested his seat and nodded. The position felt right, even after months away from competition. His body remembered what his mind was trying to forget: how to distribute weight, how to anticipate movement, how to become one with an animal that wanted nothing more than to dump him in the dirt. "Judges ready," the chute boss called. Jamal looked out at the arena, seeing the dirt he'd be landing on one way or another in the next few minutes. The crowd had grown quiet, sensing the tension of a rider preparing for battle. Somewhere in those stands might be someone who'd heard about his accident, who'd come specifically to see if the kid from Detroit still had what it took. "Ready," he called, his voice stronger than he felt. The chute gate opened, and Midnight Express exploded into the arena with a fury that took Jamal's breath away. The bull spun right exactly as expected, but the violence of the movement was unlike anything Jamal remembered from his pre-accident rides. Every muscle in his body screamed as he fought to maintain his seat, his free arm pumping frantically for balance. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The bull's rhythm was building, each jump higher and more aggressive than the last. Jamal's grip began to slip, and for a terrifying moment, he felt himself sliding toward the side of the bull, toward the same position that had nearly cost him his life in Rapid City. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. Midnight Express launched into a series of kicks that would have challenged any rider, and Jamal felt his confidence returning as he managed to match the animal's movements. His body was remembering how to ride, even if his mind was still cataloging every possible disaster. 6 seconds. 7 seconds. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing they were witnessing something special. Not just a successful ride, but a comeback story playing out in real time. Jamal could hear Tommy shouting encouragement from behind the chutes, could feel the bull beginning to tire beneath him. The 8-second whistle blew, just as Midnight Express went into one final spin. Jamal released his grip and pushed away from the bull, landing hard but cleanly in the arena dirt. He rolled twice and came up running, adrenaline overriding the pain that shot through his surgically repaired jaw. The crowd erupted as the judges held up their scores. 77 points, good enough for second place in the early going. Jamal raised his hat to acknowledge the applause, but his attention was focused on the simple fact that he was standing upright and uninjured. He'd done it, faced his demons, and emerged victorious. Tommy was waiting at the gate with a grin that could have lit up the entire arena. "How'd that feel, kid?" "Like coming home," Jamal replied, and meant it. Despite the fear, despite the risk, despite everything that had happened in Rapid City, he belonged in this arena. The accident had changed him, had given him a healthy respect for the dangers of his chosen sport, but it hadn't taken away his ability to ride. As the competition continued, Jamal's score held up well enough to earn him a check and, more importantly, prove to himself that his comeback was possible. Other riders congratulated him on his return, sharing their own stories of injuries overcome and fears conquered. The rodeo community was like that, competitive as hell when the clock was running, but supportive as family when one of their own needed encouragement. After the last rider had completed his attempt, Jamal found himself alone in the competitor's area, processing what had just happened. His phone buzzed with a text message from Maya. "Saw the results online. I'm glad you're okay. I still think you're crazy, but I'm glad you're okay." It wasn't forgiveness, and it probably wasn't the beginning of a reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement that he'd done what he needed to do. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, and some relationships couldn't survive the fundamental differences in how two people viewed risk and reward. Tommy appeared with 2 beers and a satisfied expression. "So what now? You going to chase the circuit again?" Jamal accepted the beer and considered the question. 6 months ago, his goal had been to qualify for the Professional Bull Riders Finals, to make enough money to quit his day job and pursue rodeo full-time. Now, having proven he could still compete, he found his priorities had shifted. "I think I'm going to take it one ride at a time," he said. "See how I feel, see how the body holds up. Maybe try to help some of the younger guys the way you helped me." Tommy nodded approvingly. "That's a good approach. The sport needs people who understand both the glory and the cost." As they walked toward the parking lot, Jamal reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The accident in Rapid City had nearly ended his career before it really began, had cost him his relationship with Maya, and forced him to confront his own mortality in ways most 22-year-olds never had to consider. But it had also taught him something valuable about himself, that he was tougher than he'd realized, both physically and mentally. The kid who'd been carried out on a stretcher 4 months ago had evolved into a man who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. His phone rang as he reached his truck. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice was familiar. "This is Jake Morrison from the Professional Bull Riders. I saw your ride tonight on the live stream. Hell of a comeback. We'd like to talk to you about doing some promotional work for the organization, maybe sharing your story with some of our corporate sponsors." Jamal looked back at the arena, where workers were already breaking down the equipment and preparing for the long drive to the next venue. 6 months ago, a call from the PBR would have been the culmination of all his dreams. Now it felt like the beginning of something new, not just a return to competition, but an opportunity to be part of something larger than himself. "I'd be interested in hearing more," he said. As he drove back toward Detroit through the Kansas night, Jamal thought about the kid in the red shirt from Oklahoma, about all the young riders who were just beginning their journeys in the sport. His accident had taught him that rodeo took as much as it gave, but tonight had reminded him why the trade was worth making. The road ahead was uncertain, full of bulls that would try to break him and injuries that might force him to retire sooner than he'd planned. But for now, he had 8 seconds of proof that he could still compete at the highest level. That Thunder Road hadn't taken away everything that mattered. His jaw ached slightly as he settled in for the long drive home, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. But the pain was manageable now, just another part of the price he paid for the privilege of matching his will against 1,500 pounds of controlled fury. In his rearview mirror, the lights of the rodeo grounds grew smaller and eventually disappeared, but the memory of his successful ride remained vivid and immediate. 8 seconds that had lasted a lifetime, 8 seconds that had proven he was still the man he'd been before the accident, even if he was also something more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new bulls to ride, new opportunities to test his courage and skill. But tonight was for celebrating the simple fact that he'd faced his fear and emerged victorious. In the end, that was all any cowboy could ask for. 8 seconds of truth, and the chance to prove he belonged in the arena where dreams and nightmares lived side by side in the dirt and the lights and the endless possibility of glory. If that story moved you in any way, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button so you don't miss any of our compelling stories.